welcome to Vikings Happy Hour, where we mix our favorite beverage and talk of your Minnesota Vikings.
Hello, welcome back. We are finally back. It's been a long hiatus here after the draft. Things are kind of getting back to normal out in the real world, but there is still Vikings football to cover, and I am excited to be back here tonight with my friends here. Matt Freese is in the house. Ryan and Dave. How's everybody doing tonight? It's been so long since I've seen you guys, your faces, and so long since I've really talked to you guys. So, Matt, start us off. How you doing?
Yeah, it's been a minute. I'm doing great. Kind of honestly, way more excited about the Vikings now than I was, 2 months ago. Probably the last time we actually talked about anything, 2 or 3 months ago at this point. Definitely, yeah. I feel like these post-draft signings have really invigorated me.
Right. Hopefully, we'll talk about it tonight, but hopefully there's still some things to come, and we can chat about that in some future episodes. What's up, Viking Jerome? Good to see you again. Matt, you got any drink on hand with you?
I do. Highlight, IPA, Cigar City. And then when I'm done with this one, I'm going to crack a Funk Citrus. They are out near the Philly area, kind of near me. So
I can already tell I've come underprepared as I only have one drink. I think back in March I probably had three or four lined up.
I started on this one before the show, and I was like, you know what? I might as well grab a second one to get me through the hour. So
that's a solid idea. Ryan, how about yourself? How are you doing? What are you drinking? It's good to see you. I like the hair. Like the glasses.
Yeah, I usually don't show the hair or the glasses, I feel like, but I needed to wear the glasses so during the show I could watch this Hawks-Bucks game, and I can't see that far without them. So, no, things are good. Actually just got done with an interview for potential promotion at my company, and
let's go.
That was a little stressful. So we're sticking away from beer tonight. We're doing the hard stuff. So I got some Four Roses small batch, which is kind of my go-to bourbon, and excited to talk Vikings football. It's been a little bit. I think maybe a couple of us are maybe a little burnt out after the draft, so I think it's good to get a little break, let some fun stuff happen, and now we can get back to it.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone was burnt out from the draft, it's got to be our wingman back there, Dave. The whole draft coverage, every show leading up to it. Dave, how have you been? I know the shows have kind of taken a little bit of a breather, but how have you been these last couple of months, and what are you drinking tonight?
Well, I'm doing fine, getting ready for the big move. I'm moving from Colorado to Texas here in 2.5 weeks. And other than that, I mean, we've climbed the pocket has produced some things, but it's been way slow. And I prefer, believe it or not, the upbeat almost everyday shows. And I look forward to when we get back into that groove. It probably won't be till training camp, but I look forward to then, and I look forward to talking about the camp battles that we highlighted in the title of this episode. So everything's good. Oh, and I am drinking a Colorado's own Voodoo Ranger IPA.
Hey, those are good.
Yeah,
they're not bad.
That's a good IPA.
That's solid. Like I said, I only got one drink. I quick made a vodka Sprite. Unless I'm on the lake, I don't like to drink too much beer in the summer. I switched to mixed drinks pretty much. So vodka Sprite it is tonight. We mentioned kind of the break that we've taken. And Matt, you were talking about kind of all the stuff that's happened since we kind of last met and talked. And I think one of the biggest things that a lot of people have talked about over the past week, but the Danielle Hunter drama is over. He has renegotiated his contract. We've added on a couple void years. So, Matt, I kind of want to get your takeaways on that Danielle Hunter renegotiated contract. I know there were questions about his neck injury. Are you concerned with that, or how are you feeling now that he's back in the fold?
For the neck injury, I think we just have to trust what we're hearing in that he will be able to return to full health. I mean, I'm not a doctor, right? I don't understand the intricacies of, injuries in terms of what the recovery timeline or what anything like that looks like. I'm confident that Hunter will be back to himself. But in terms of the contract, I actually love the deal for the Vikings. We cleared up cap space this year. We take on not a whole lot of additional cap hit next year. Now, the expectation is that we would have to, extend him or do something to make Hunter happy again. But that $18 million roster bonus goes away if he holds out next year as well. That reporting has come in the last couple of days. So at that point, the Vikings really don't have to give him an extra contract, or they don't have to have it worked out immediately prior to that roster bonus being sealed, right? So that gives them a little bit more flexibility. It's not a situation like we've seen in the past where we had to cut Everson Griffin before like 3 days into the league year, right? It doesn't end up being that situation because if Hunter's still unhappy with his contract and he doesn't want to show up, guess what? The money's not his anymore. And I think even at the price that he's looking at next year, I think it's like $20 million or something. Like, you're keeping Danielle Hunter on that price. If he's going to show up and he's going to play, even if he's unhappy, you're keeping him at that price. And he has to show up to be able to get that money. So I think it's another fantastic move by the Vikings, to be honest with you. We've done a great job. I saw a tweet yesterday. PFF had given out their, top 25 contracts in the NFL. I think Brad Spielberger, who used to be at Over the Cap, the best cap resource there is, to be honest, did it. 3 of the top 7, it was Danielle Hunter number 1, or Stephon Diggs number 1, Danielle Hunter number 3, and I think Eric Kendricks was number 7, were negotiated by the Vikings. Like, we're fantastic at contracts. Sign Briz forever, lifetime contract for me.
Yeah,
but Ryan, I don't know if you have any added thoughts there.
No, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head here. I think we all knew that this Danielle Hunter drama was going to get figured out one way or another. You're not going to let an elite talent like that, go unhappy into the training camp, especially since he hasn't played in over a year because of that neck injury. You want to make sure that you get a full assessment of everything that he can bring and get him as many reps as possible prior to the season. So, again, he can come back, full steam ahead. So I think we all figured that the contract would get negotiated and figured out in good time, and I'm glad it's got done early. We don't want to have to worry about that. And again, like Matt said, the fact that we were able to open up more cap space, which then we utilized to sign another elite interior guy in Sheldon Richardson, essentially with that exact money that we saved on the cap space this year with that negotiation. I think that's just excellent front office management there. Again, this is, I think, what we do well in terms of as a front office. I think there's some other things that, we have some deficiencies at, but I think contracts and being able to, work those is literally top of the list for this team. So hopefully we utilize the rest of this money well throughout the rest of this offseason.
Anthony,
go ahead, Dave.
Just put in that he thinks Danielle's going to get 15 sacks this season. I hope he does. One of the good things about this contract renegotiation, is there's no new money. They just moved money up from the third year, and there's really no new money. He's not getting paid more. He's getting more money up front. That's what made him happy. It gives the Vikings a season to evaluate, has he returned from his neck injury? Is it problematic? If it is, they release him next year. If it's not, we've got him under contract for $20 million with what Matt said. The key is if he holds out, he loses the 18. And that is just brilliance by Brzezinski. Brilliance. And there's nobody else in the league that's that good, in my opinion.
Yeah. I do question Anthony's, and this is maybe going off a little bit off topic here in the scheme of how I laid out the recap, but he says Danielle Hunter will get at least 15 sacks. I struggle with that number if there's not another defensive end on the other side. Do you guys agree?
Well, I think he's going to get 14 and a half, which I hope Anthony thinks is okay because that's what he got in 2019 and 2018. So, I mean, we might as well just continue the streak, right? No, I think that's a fair point because previously we've had a very strong defensive line. We had Linval clogging up the middle. We've had Sheldon Richardson, for a year, or and particularly, we've had Everson Griffin on the other side. Um, and the reason that's important is when you have multiple threats on the defensive line, it means that opponents can't key on one player. So last year, Afadio Denabo is not a fantastic edge rusher by any means, but he was our only player who could rush the passer at all, basically, after we got rid of Yannick Ngakoue, right? And he saw one of the highest double team rates in the league among all players, right? I think that's something you're going to see from Hunter this year on third downs because the Vikings don't really have another strong presence who can push the pocket. You hope Sheldon Richardson can do that, and maybe he helps, and maybe the combination of Richardson and Dalvin Tomlinson, and we'll get to these players later, helps a little bit, but I think Hunter is going to be the number one focus for opposing teams. So I think that's a good point because he's going to see chips from tight ends. He's going to see a lot of help.
Yeah. We've kind of alluded
and to just kind of
to it a little
step in
bit.
on that though, to step in on that real quick, Matt. Sorry to cut you off there.
You're fine. You're fine, buddy.
The fact is, too, though, I mean, to just play devil's advocate, and I'm not the one to be all optimistic. That's just not really my go-to stance here. I like to try to be realistic, but
Unless they're from Oklahoma.
worst, unless they're from Oklahoma, that's right. Worst case scenario, you don't have a stud on that other side, right? We don't utilize this extra money that we have on another solid edge rusher like Justin Houston or Melvin Gordon or Melvin Ingram or something like that. You have Stephen Weatherly, who, has been good in spots. He's probably better as like a number 3 kind of guy, just kind of come in as needed. And then you got a couple of really exciting young, toolsy edge prospects. Maybe we hit on one of them, and that includes DJ Wanham, right? So maybe we hit on one of them, maybe we don't. But even so, we're going to have at least a healthy enough of a rotation, I think, to have at least at worst a fresh body in there who can come in and at least try to disrupt a little bit. And again, hopefully with Andre Patterson's work in developing these guys. And again, I know there's some folks out there that think that maybe the Patterson the Patterson wonder, so to speak, is a facade, and he just got lucky with Danielle Hunter being just great at what Danielle Hunter does. But at the same time, hopefully, we can hit on one of these guys, and then with the presence of Sheldon Richardson, who is a proven pocket penetrator from the inside. Dalvin Tomlinson, who also does a really strong job at that, I think, from a nose tackle position. I think that we're going to have enough where Danielle isn't necessarily going to be double teamed as much as, maybe was alluded to earlier. So at least that's the hope. That's thinking, I think, a little bit more optimistically than I like to be. But at the same time, I just kind of feel like there's that opportunity here where at very worst, we're just going to have a lot of young, talented, fresh guys available to show what they got.
I think my only concern with that would come if Hunter gets hurt, because then you really don't have anybody. And so then you're really just relying on interior pressure, which probably isn't going to work too well. So,
but that's like 90% of our roster. If any of our good players get hurt, we are effed, right? Like we're so top heavy on this roster that, one receiver gets hurt, we're screwed. One running back, I guess we're okay probably, but it's a lot of these positions we're pretty top heavy on. So we just have to rely on the coaching, and hopefully they can develop some of these young guys.
With the exception of maybe cornerback now, which is strange to say.
I was going to say corner and defensive tackle.
The 2 weakest points a year ago are arguably our deepest and most talented spots now. Matt, you just wrote about the new signing Breland. Do you want to give people a little bit of a glimpse of what that article was about?
Yeah, so you can check it out over at climbingthepocket.com. I believe it released like a week and a half ago. I also did a video over on the YouTube channel on Breland a little bit, talking about a couple plays that I thought really exemplified what he can do as a player. And I think when you watch Bashad Breland, the first thing you notice is his man cover skills. So he was asked to play man a lot in Kansas City, and he does it very well, I think. He's a physical player, so remember back to Xavier Rhodes, right? A very physical outside corner who is susceptible to penalties. He had 10 in each of the past 2 years. He gets penalized pretty often, so that's going to be something that we have to, that you kind of take with the good with the bad in that case, because he's got very good ball skills. I don't remember the exact numbers, but he basically led the league in Washington when he was with that team, to start out his career in pass deflections over like 3 seasons. It was crazy. He was getting 14, 15 pass deflections a season, which is a very high number. And he's also gotten interceptions. There was a nice play in the Chiefs' first game against the Raiders where they actually lost and they let up like 40 points in that game. And 350 passing yards to Derek Carr, none of it was on Breland. Everything was on the other corners.
Wow.
And you can see he's fluid. He's able to turn with players. He's able to stay vertical with Henry Ruggs. Like, there's a lot of good things shown in that game. Now, obviously, the way I've talked about him a bit probably would overrate him. He is a solid starting corner. He's not your prime Patrick Peterson, right, who's now on our roster, or your current, like, Jalen Ramsey or somebody like that, who's going to shut down, the best wide receivers in the league. But he's somebody you can feel confident about putting out there on a game-to-game basis. He can hold his own against any player in the league. Maybe you don't want him on, it's not like Breland Island or anything like that, right? But he is a startable player, and he's probably our fourth corner right now, right? We're probably not projecting him to start, and I think that's really nice.
Yeah. Dave, I feel like I kind of skipped over you, so
Well,
let's hear your thoughts.
I'm going to move this to camp battles a bit, and let's talk
Okay.
about Breland.
Let's do it.
Breland, as I show him right now, is CB4, but he very well may take over Dantzler's spot. That's going to be interesting to watch in camp. Who's going to battle out for those starting corner spots? Now, corner play this next season, I suspect, will be a rotation. Just like the offensive line is, Zimmer has developed his guys in to be able to rotate in and out and keep everybody fresh. And I think that'll be key to keeping Patrick Peterson on the top of his game.
Dave, can I interrupt 1 second?
Sure.
I'm just curious. You said CB4. Who do you have him behind?
Dantzler.
So it's you got Peterson, Dantzler. Are you putting him behind Mackenzie Alexander too?
Alexander's the nickel. Breland's going to be outside with Dantzler or Peterson.
Am I missing a corner then?
No, so Peterson, Alexander,
and Dantzler, we've got CB 1, 2, and 3.
Gotcha. Got it. All right. Keep going.
And,
Sorry.
and I'll disagree there, honestly, but I'll let Dave. I'm going to let you finish, but I want to interject there a little bit. So
well, and that's fine, but I think
I love disagreement.
Old corners and corners like Breland coming in are going to do nothing but benefit from being under Zimmer's tutelage, because he's in their ear every day. And it's going to be interesting to see, are they going to put the more experienced Breland in versus Dantzler, who has a tendency to get hurt because he's slight. He may have gained 10 pounds. I hope he did.
He looks bigger.
We'll see. And to back up, speaking of camp battles, you talked about Daniil Hunter and then who's playing on his opposite side right now. Weatherly's penciled in as the starter. I look forward to the Weatherly-Wanham battle, because Wanham has gotten bigger and better and worked on it on the offseason. And Weatherly, a friend of the show, Luke Braun, who does Locked On Vikings, did a great story on Weatherly and how anytime he makes a mistake, he tries to fix that. He made a mistake being in Carolina, not focusing on certain things. He's supposedly trying to fix that this year, so hopefully he plays better And that is going to be an interesting competition to see in camp. And with the rotation on the defensive line, be it on the outside or on the inside with three great defensive tackles, this is going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, and I don't think they're done. I think they're still going to bring a guy in at defensive end. I really do. And maybe it's an Everson. Maybe they bring him back. Though I haven't seen any tweets from Everson lately, so I hope he's all right. But I just don't think that they're quite done at that position. Even though I do like Weatherly, but more so as just like a situational or rotational kind of pass rusher. I thought he was good before. Or decent, not good. He was decent before he left for Carolina. But yeah, I mean, Carolina in their coaching too, it's kind of gotten knocked on from players leaving this past year. So it doesn't surprise me that he had a semi-down year.
Ryan, disagreed with me. What did you disagree?
Yeah, go back to corners here, Ryan.
I mean, it's not even like that I disagree per se, but I do. Like, I really think that the starting corners are going to be all first-year players with us. I think Breeland's going to start on the outside opposite Peterson. I think he has a more proven success. He's proven to be a lot healthier. And he's been really good since he joined the league. I know, Matt, you did a whole breakdown on him, and actually that was fantastic. So any listeners that are listening or watching with us today, Matt, what's your Twitter handle at Matt Freeze?
At Fries Football. So my last name
Fries Football. That's
fries,
right.
Like French fries. Football.
There you go. And so at Fries Football, he did a great breakdown on Breeland. I went through that, and it was fantastic. My buddy Crockett, who we all know somewhat in the Climb the Pocket network, he really wanted us to draft him, and he's been high on him ever since college. And so I've obviously watched him because I love to gloat when he's wrong about anything. So I've been watching him closely when he's been in the league, and for a journeyman kind of guy, right? He's been through a few teams now. He's been surprisingly solid. And Dantzler, although he had a really strong first year, and I guess I'll say pretty good first year. I wouldn't even say really strong, but a good first year. He just is having a hard time staying healthy. And I think the lack of reps that he's going to be receiving in this offseason, and with Breeland getting those reps, he's going to lose that, I guess, hold on that CB2. And obviously none of these guys, Breeland's played a little in the slot, but not a lot. Dantzler, nothing in the slot. Peterson, he would only go to the slot when he was shadowing, and that's where his worst stuff came. So you're going to keep McKenzie in there as much as you can, and then Gladney in there if he comes back. So I really think that it's going to be Breeland opposite Dantzler, and allow Dantzler to really continue to develop under the tutelage of those two savvy vets. But to your point too, Dave, around the defensive line rotation, it's going to be great. Something I'd be interested to see. I know Sheldon Richardson spent quite a bit of time last year at edge too. So it would be interesting to see those four big boys, running through teams on first and second down potentially, and then kicking Pierce out to bring in one of those, again, younger edge rushers on obvious passing situations.
So just a couple of things to add on the corner discussion. I generally agree. I think the key is Mackenzie Alexander, who is actually teammates with Breeland at Clemson. Fun fact, if you guys didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
But he is the only player who I feel is capable of playing a full-time slot role, with the exception of Jeff Gladney, who I don't count as part of the roster right now for obvious reasons. So Breeland and Peterson and Dantzler are all outside guys. I don't think they have the fluidity or necessarily the quickness to be able to play in the slot. Breeland played a couple snaps last year, but it was mostly when like a wide receiver was in the slot and a tight end or somebody else was split out wide. So that's really not really slot snaps to me. I think that, Ryan, you actually have a good point where I'm kind of conflicted on Dantzler because I'd like him to get more reps, right? and allow him to play in game situations. But I'd also like to put the best player out there, and I think Breland's a better player. The question for me becomes, what does Patrick Peterson look like? Because we expect him to bounce back. We expect Zimmer to help him as, kind of a corner guru, as somebody who was able to help Terrence Newman extend his career like until he was 38 or 39 or whatever, right? But if Peterson plays like he did last year, right? And I think his play last year was exacerbated by the fact that the Cardinals tried to treat him like he was the same player he was in his prime, right? But if he doesn't get it back together, I think you could see him all of a sudden riding the bench, because I think we have the ability at corner to do that. The other thing with the defensive line that I think is interesting, and I like the idea of Sheldon playing outside, and one thing I've been looking into recently is the Giants' defensive line last year. And what the Giants would do is they would have Leonard Williams, Dalvin Tomlinson, and Dexter Lawrence, who's like 350 pounds, right? So all those guys are 300 plus pounds on the field at the same time. And they'd probably call it a 3-4 Okie. It's very similar to a 4-3 under. So they'd have 5 guys on the line of scrimmage essentially, and they would have a 1 technique, a 3 technique, a 5 technique, who was their big defender. So that'd be Leonard Williams, or actually I saw Dexter Lawrence, who's like 340 pounds in that position a lot, which is very interesting to me that he's outside on the outside shoulder of the tackle. And then they had, like a 7 tech or a wide 9, which would be Danielle Hunter in our case, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what would be Anthony Barr lined up over a tight end on the line of scrimmage. So those are your 5 guys on the line of scrimmage. I think that's something the Vikings could look to employ a lot, and that keeps, our lack of, the defensive end group is weird because we have a ton of young guys who I don't want to kick off the roster in any case, but we don't have anybody who I want to start either, right? Because we've got Wanham, who I don't want to start. We've got the 2 rookies who are 4th round or higher picks in Patrick Jones and Janarius Robinson. You don't cut players who were drafted in the 4th round or earlier, pretty much. I mean, Willie Beavers is like one of the very few examples of that happening across the entire NFL in the past 5 years. Like, those types of players just don't get cut before the season. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out in terms of who we're willing to play there. And if we want to limit their snaps, putting 3 defensive tackles on the field, with Sheldon Richardson being one of them, makes sense. But go ahead, Matt.
No, I'm enjoying this conversation, honestly. And I am also, I've seen some tweets out there of maybe suggesting putting Richardson at defensive end as well. So I might go look at some of that game tape of you say it's on the Giants?
Yeah, the Giants last year. Their 2 main things, which was kind of interesting, they did a lot of that where they would have, I think it was an Okie front is what it's called. And they also had a lot of where they had no 1 technique, but 2, 3 techniques on passing downs. Which is something we've seen from the Vikings in the past. I mean, that's what the Vikings do when they go with their double A gap looks, right? Because they walk the linebackers up into the A gaps. But it was kind of interesting to have the big bodies spread wider out when normally they're in the middle of the formation, and especially on early downs, that really helps you with run defense, which is something that was a problem for us last year. So
the reason for it is most of the teams in the NFL are now running the wide zone. And the way to defeat the wide zone is to stack that double tackle on the front. And that tends to do it because it forces the running back into plays to the outside. And it takes longer to go east and west than it does north and south, which gives your linebackers time to go side to side and stop it. Back in the day, football is cyclical. You'll find that things that were used decades ago come back in fashion and then they go out. Decades ago, this was called a 5-2 defense, and those big tackles would shade to the power side, whichever side's showing power. And you'd have a weak side linebacker. You'd have 2 linebackers, left and right linebacker, and would go over the end on the opposite side, like you said. And it was effective. And back then, it was used against the wishbone, the veer, and running offenses like that. This is much the same sort of concepts that are going to be employed this year. And I look forward to seeing it because the Vikings got hammered on defense last year, and I suspect this year they'll do a whole lot better.
Yeah, I don't think it's specifically Alvin Kamara rushing for 6 touchdowns on Christmas Day that led to this, but I like saying that that's the only reason that Zimmer is like never again, because it's just such an exaggeration on each side.
It's specifically that though, like,
it was all season though, but that was a very glaring game for everyone involved.
Yeah, that.
But I mean, also, even if we didn't go out and grab Tomlinson and Richardson and all these guys, we were out Kendricks, we were out Barr, we were out Pierce. Like, we were missing a lot of Hunter, obviously. So, I mean, even without adding all of like this beefed up talent that we ended up adding, that wasn't going to happen again. That wouldn't have happened had we been healthy. Like,
it won't happen.
Literally, dude is rushing against freaking like literal guys who won't even make rosters this year. Like, come on, it's not a great accomplishment during a COVID year when we're out a lot of talent, and he's going against CFL type talent. Like, who cares? Like, geez.
There were a lot of missed assignments, though, too. Like, it's not just based on talent. Like, it was just lazy playing and tackling as well. That game specifically.
Yeah, no, for sure. And part of it is probably exacerbated by, like, how hard Alvin Kamara is to tackle, right? Like, he's, like, harder than Dalvin Cook to tackle, and I don't say that lightly at all because I think Dalvin Cook is the second most untackleable person in the NFL. But it's just, I mean, it was so embarrassing, like, to watch every single Vikings game where anytime there's a run play, both of our defensive tackles are 4 yards downfield, like, every single play. And, like, sometimes Shamar Stephen wouldn't be 4 yards downfield, and that started to make me feel good. And that's when you know you're having a bad year.
I saw a comment come across from Anthony. I guess technically we said camp battles we would talk about. So let's move along here. We spent enough time on defense. Let's move along here. He wants us to talk about the offensive line. My argument would be, and this is a good thing, and maybe I'm just you guys can stop me if you think I'm wrong. I don't think we need to talk about the offensive line. I think it's.
Oh, we have a camp battle.
I think we have a camp battle, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Between Wyatt Davis and who?
Definitely got camp battles.
Yeah, Wyatt Davis and
Drew Sabia, baby, come on!
Every other guard on the roster. So between Wyatt Davis and himself to be good enough to supplant any other player as a rookie, like, that's the camp battle. It's an internal battle with Wyatt Davis if he's ready enough. To me,
but every other position is solidified, correct?
No,
like it's what position don't you think?
All right, I think Davis has pretty much already got his right guard spot solidified. I think he's already practiced with the ones. It's just a matter of time before he moves up.
Dave, you know hot takes is tomorrow night, right?
No, the other camp battle is Darisaw and Hill.
Do you think that's a battle?
Yeah, because I don't think. The Vikings tend to keep rookies back unless they absolutely need them. And if Hill's playing better in camp than Darisaw, because Darisaw's learning, Darisaw eventually is going to inherit that spot. The question is when. And is it going to be by game 1? Or is it going to be like by game 6? And I look forward to seeing how Hill has advanced. We know he's been our number 1 swing tackle for forever, but he's decent, especially when he comes off the bench. Versus how Darisaw's picking everything up and adjusting to the speed. Darisaw will eventually win, but the question is when. And I see that as a camp battle because I don't think they see the Vikings coaching staff putting him in until he's ready. Whereas I see Wyatt Davis going in early because the competition is not
You know what,
superior.
Dave? I like that take, and the only reason I like it is because Darisaw was hurt, and
Mm-hmm.
so I feel like that is like the one kind of reason maybe they're holding him back a little bit more than they would have, because I do think that like if you take him in the first round, he's playing. Like end of
Yeah.
story. Great. Garrett Bradbury started week 1. Darisaw I expect to start week 1, but we always hear about how much they love Rashad Hill, how much they love Oli Udoh on the right side. So maybe you're onto something, and maybe week 1 we're rolling out Hill instead of Darisaw. Matt Ryan.
I feel like had Darisaw not had that injury, he may have already started taking some 1 reps. But again, he missed I think it was like a week of practice, and that's kind of big at this point in the season. But there's been a lot of great talk about what he's been able to do in the film room and just kind of how he's picking up the offense as a whole. I think he does. You're right, Dave. What I will say is I think it is a camp battle. He does have to earn that spot. It's not going to be given to him. Wyatt Davis is already earning that spot because everything else we have at that spot is ass. So we have to improve upon that. And that was an obvious thing where Hill and even Udoh to a certain extent, but Hill mainly, has been proven to be
Adequate.
a decent fill-in at times, like when he's been called upon. And so you have to be better than that. And since he's had limited reps, he hasn't been able to prove that, which is fine. I mean, I think Darisaw will win that battle by end of camp, and he'll start day 1, personally. And like I said, I know it's a laughing joke, but I'm not giving up on my guy. I think I bet Samia beats out Dozier for the final roster spot.
Oh, I hope so. I love Samia's attitude better than Dakota Dozier's any day of the week.
I'm not giving up on my Oklahoma guy until it actually happens. I stayed with Jeff Badette until he got cut, and then
Hey,
that
he's
was
on
the most
another
recent
team now.
Oklahoma guy. He's on the Falcons, and he's going to battle for a spot as well. You know,
There we go. So just to
he's better than BB, by the way. He's better than BB, by the way.
Well, okay, we can have that discussion later, actually. But so on the offensive line, I think that's a really good point with Darisaw that you made, Dave. I think Oli Udoh is a borderline starter to me, right? And his ideal role is a swing tackle, but for a swing tackle, you want a player who could start on the left side or the right side in an emergency. And in this case, if Darisaw isn't up to snuff because he's been held back, I know he had core muscle surgery in the offseason, and then I think his injury in minicamp and OTAs and stuff was an additional injury on top of that. So if he's held back by injuries, then that is a concern. And if he's not ready on time, Rashad Hill becomes the starter until the team thinks he is. Wyatt Davis, I think a dark horse for right guard could be Oli Udoh, who we mentioned a little bit earlier. I heard something today, I think in Klint Kubiak's press conference, he mentioned the possibility of Udoh moving to guard or trying things at guard. So if that's a possibility, then that becomes interesting, right? Because I would feel better about him being competition for Wyatt Davis than I would about anybody else on the roster right now outside of Mason Cole, who I think they're probably just gonna Brad Jones Mason Cole, right? Like they think he's a center only, and they're just gonna keep him there. Is my expectation. Which I don't necessarily agree with because he can't snap the football. Like literally.
Which is an important thing for a center.
So I don't really get that one, but yeah, I think that's what's going to happen. But actually, this might be a good segue into the wide receiver position, right? Now that we've moved on to offense, wide receiver 3 battle. I think your leader in the clubhouse is Chad Beebe. I think. Well, I should say the roles
in the clubhouse by default.
Because if you have a situation where Adam Thielen or Justin Jefferson are hurt, the player who takes their place is BC Johnson. if you have a situation where an 11 personnel, which only happens like 20-something% of the time for the Vikings, which is like the lowest in the NFL, Chad Beebe's on the field because they like him in the slot and they like him on third down where he gets open within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage, and then it's like a 50-50 chance of whether or not he'll drop the ball.
Yeah.
I would love for Amir Smith-Marset, who I think is a versatile player. I think they said they were using him only on the outside, which, again, I don't agree with. But Justin Jefferson or Adam Thielen can go into the slot equally well, and be just as impactful. So if they're willing to put Amir Smith-Marset as a third wide receiver on the field and move one of the other two into the slot, I don't care. But he brings an intriguing option to me because he's a deep threat, and I think is a relatively well-rounded wide receiver, especially for a fifth-round pick. I like him quite a bit. But it's just a question of whether or not they're willing to put that trust in him or if he's actually that good. So any thoughts on the wide receiver battle, Matt?
I'm hoping. I mean, we heard last week. I think Tanishka posted something about Paul Allen speaking on his show, saying how Amir Smith-Marset was quietly wowing some of the personnel there or some of the staff there, and so from my experience, I was a huge BC Johnson fan. I thought last year was the opportunity he needed to kind of really show up and prove that he could be that guy, and he couldn't. Not to say that I think he's bad, but he's probably 4 or 5 now. And so I really think that job is open. And to your point, whether that's outside and then you just move someone into the slot, like a Thielen or a Jefferson, so be it. But I do think we're going to have some fun training camp videos to watch of Amir Smith-Marset this summer.
Yeah, I think that we haven't done a great job of addressing this position, and I know we're all in the same group text, right? Or Twitter group, whatever you want to call it. And we had that discussion today where BB is considered our wide receiver 3 by default when it comes pre-injury, right? Like just like you said, Matt, he's our slot receiver basically at this point in time, and I literally. I don't get a lot of time during the day to do stupid stuff like I did, but I literally went through and looked at every other team's wide receiver 3, 4, 5, whatever it might be. And they're literally, and again, some people in the group disagreed with me, and that's fine. I don't need that affirmation that everyone agrees with me, but I don't think there's a worse wide receiver 3 on any team than Chad Beebe. I know there's a close call with the Falcons with Christian Blake, and I don't know how to say the other dude's name. I call him OZ because I can't say it, Zacharias or something like that. Zacchaeus, yeah.
He's super fun.
Yeah, right. And he actually, I think, did well at times last year. And then I think the other one was maybe the Lions, who have, I think, again, I don't think their receiving core is better, but I think that their wide receiver 3 situation is better. So when you look at, the fact that we probably have the worst wide receiver 3 situation in the whole entire league, and there's other teams that have better 4s and 5s in our 3, I think that's something we really do need to address. I hope Amir Smith-Marset is the answer. I'm not sure if he is. I watched some of his tape, and I thought he was a talented individual, but you can't rely on 5th-round rookies to be heavy contributors at a wide receiver 3. And I get it. We don't use, what was a percentage, Matt? 20-some percent of the time or something like that?
It's 20-some percent. I think it's a bit over a quarter of the time. But that's minuscule. Okay,
so
the majority of that.
Let's say a quarter of the time we're in that personnel. That's fine. If we don't use that position a lot, that's okay. But again, Thielen, Jefferson get hurt, we are screwed. And at worst, or in the most dream scenario, you have a fully healthy season out of those two, and you are only using that wide receiver 3 position at a 25% clip. Have your wide receiver 3 at least be able to contribute on special teams. BB can't do that. He drops punts. He can't do kickoff. He's not a gunner, right?
He can catch game-winning touchdowns.
He did, and I'm not going to sit here and just say he's complete. I mean, I'm not a big believer in him, and I think Miles Gorham could have caught that touchdown. I mean, he was pretty wide open. But bring in a DD Westbrook, somebody who could contribute significant reps if one of those guys goes hurt, and if none of them do. You have a punt returner at wide receiver 3 at 25% clip and a solid punt returner. Bring in a guy who can contribute at punt return and who can fill in as needed if somebody is hurt. And hopefully that's Amir Smith-Marset. I don't think he has a ton of punt return reps at Iowa where like DD does. And I think we can get DD at a nice cheap cost at the moment right now. And that would fill my Oklahoma quota. But I think that, you got to bring in that talent and bring in competition, because right now relying on a 5th-round rookie in Chad Beebe and BC Johnson is not the answer for wide receiver 3, in my opinion.
So at the risk of offending you a little bit here, Ryan, I don't think DD Westbrook's any good at all. I don't want to bring him in. I don't think he's a more useful player to the Vikings than Chad Beebe is. The player
but why? I mean, he had 3 600-yard seasons in his career already, and a couple punt return touchdowns. I mean,
to be honest with you, I think his 600-yard seasons are primarily a function of how bad the Jaguars have been and the fact that he was used in that role. I think that the role Chad Beebe fulfills in terms of consistently getting open is important enough that like it's something to have on the team. I think Westbrook would be more of a replacement for, say, a BC Johnson than he would for a Beebe. In that like he doesn't fill the exact same role Beebe does. The player I would like to add would be Golden Tate, who was cut by the Giants, I believe, and is still a free agent. And Tate has punt return experience as well. Like you said, Smith-Marset did return a couple of punts, but he didn't do it consistently at Iowa. And Wangu, who was drafted in the 4th round, didn't do it at all. He was a kick returner only. But yeah, I don't love DD Westbrook, but I would like Golden Tate. The question would be, how much money does he want? So,
well, we have it.
And that's a justification, I guess, too, Matt, is that, like, yeah, there are better players out there than DD Westbrook. It's just how much money we want to put at that position, given the fact that we do have another need, a pretty glaring need at defensive end. So I'm of the mindset that I'd rather pay a defensive end that bigger money than that, like, Golden Tate likely would require, and then go and grab, like, a Justin Houston type player and then have a DD Westbrook kind of guy. Again, I know you're not in love with him. That's fine. I get it. We're not always going to agree, Matt. That's fine.
Sure.
You're entitled to your wrong opinion. That's great. No, just joking.
Oh my gosh, here we go.
Again, I'm off on a lot of stuff. I'm not going to sit here and say I'm a football whisperer or anything, but just that type of guy who, again, like to your point, I don't care who it is, just somebody who can contribute outside of just receiver if we're not using the wide receiver 3 as often as we are. So give me somebody who can be a gunner. Give me somebody who can punt return. Give me somebody who can contribute in other ways outside of that 25% wide receiver 3 threshold that we have.
Dave, give me your wide receiver 3 thoughts here.
Well, we don't play him that often. We have, I think, 2 very good tight ends and a very good pass catching Dalvin Cook. I think the weapons are there. The one thing I worry about is if Thielen or Jefferson get hurt, who's going to step up into that secondary, wide receiver 2 role, no matter who it is. Hopefully it's Marset. If not, they just go with more tight end and more running back. It's how they do. I think the wide receiver 3 and how this offense has played in the last few years is relatively insignificant. Now, I wish they had a better one. BB tries to fill the Jarius Wright role of that 3rd down, get you 10 yards, get you the 1st down. I wish he did better than that. I wish he was as good as Jarius Wright, put it that way. But
Literally, the Cowboys have 5 receivers, or I'm sorry, let's just say 3 receivers better than our wide receiver 3 for sure, and that's probably giving them like not giving them enough credit.
Oh,
But what I
I
will
think
say,
Cedric Wilson and Noah Brown and probably even
and their
Simi
new guy
Fehoko.
Semi Fuko
Simi
or whatever
Fehoko,
from
yeah.
Stanford, yeah. But what I was gonna say quick is one data point that we're not, I guess, addressing is the fact that we have a new offense coming in and we're making assumptions based on last year's offense. And Klint Kubiak's been around a lot of different offensive systems. Of course, what's likely going to happen, he's going to follow his dad's footsteps and run a similar offense to his dad and to Stefanski in a way. But he's been around more offenses that run more of those 3 receiver sets and 4 receiver sets and whatnot. So I'm interested to see how he integrates his philosophy versus his dad's or some of the recent philosophies he's been around.
Yeah, and that brings us into our last topic here. So, Matt and Dave, if you want to give your thoughts on Klint Kubiak coming in, I know we've talked about it on past pods back in the draft, but we finally got some player acknowledgement, kind of about how he's running his offense. It's got a little taste of his dad's, but also a little bit of Stefanski, but it is just, quote, his own. So, Matt, do you have any concerns about Klint Kubiak this upcoming season?
I mean, I don't know how much we're going to learn from like a coach interview about what physically they're going to call. I think if you look at Stefanski, like the one thing you could hope for, the one thing that was missing between Stefanski and Kubiak, and Stefanski continued to do really well with this in Cleveland, was the screen game. Like Stefanski's screen game was very inventive, and we had a ton of big screens that hit very well in 2019, and we didn't see that kind of success in 2020. And Cleveland saw that success in 2020, right? So it was a Stefanski play calling thing. So I don't know if Kubiak can revive that magic, but that would be nice. If you look at Stefanski's play calling, I don't think it was markedly different from what Kubiak did last year. Gary Kubiak, obviously, with Klint.
He just had a better quarterback.
Sure.
That's debatable.
Yeah, very. But I think the interesting thing, and something you're seeing more with outside zone teams that could be interesting, is the run game developments. Because, like, if you look at San Francisco, they run a lot of power and they run a lot of gap scheme plays. You look at what Cleveland did last year. Now, Bill Callahan is Cleveland's offensive line coach, and Bill Callahan is one of the best offensive line coaches in the NFL, and I'm sure he has a lot to do with the run game, right? But if you look at that run game, that's a very diverse run game. You know, they still have wide zone as their like staple, but they run a lot of power. They run a lot of gap scheme kind of runs that are mixed in there. And I think that diversity, that ability to do kind of everything in the run game is important. And I think the other thing is the Vikings added 2 players who can be that now, right? We added Wyatt Davis, who's a bigger guard who can pull in the run game. Like, I don't think the Vikings had a player who could pull really successfully in the run game prior to adding Wyatt Davis. I'm not sure if Cleveland's that guy. I just don't think he's big enough. And you have a Darisaw, and that was something Zimmer talked about when they drafted those guys, is they wanted bigger offensive linemen because our smaller guys were getting kind of beat up a little bit. Like you saw that against the stronger defensive lines. But from a passing perspective, I expect most of the same thing, which is fine because it's very effective, right? Like the Vikings had a lot of deep dropbacks. They had a lot. Kirk had a very high depth of target last year. I think we want to continue that. I think we want to be a run game team that gets explosive pass plays because we have 2 receivers that can create explosive pass plays. And the good thing about Jefferson and Thielen is they can create it no matter who's guarding them. Like, you're going to have situations like, if you guys remember a couple of years ago when like Diggs and Thielen were like double and triple covered for all games for a couple of games, like that's what you would have to do to stop them and stop the explosive plays. Which maybe we just talked about our wide receiver 3 depth, like that can happen.
Well, that frees up your tight ends to catch balls underneath and split to safety.
But absolutely, you could have the tight ends, and Irv Smith is somebody who we obviously all want to see more involved. And the other question I think you ask yourself if you're Klint Kubiak, right, is who are the best players on my team? And we did a roster ranking recently, I don't know how many of us participated. Maybe we all participated, but Irv Smith, Tyler Conklin, C.J. Ham, all three of those guys we ranked above Chad Beebe, who was our ostensible wide receiver 3. So I think those guys you're going to want to have see the field more than everybody else, and that means that you're going to have a lot of 12 and a lot of 21 personnel.
Yeah.
But I mean, to that point though, that's not a good thing. Like, there's zero chance in the world that I'd rather have a tight end on the field than a wide receiver 3. It's just that our wide receiver 3 currently is. I mean, Dave, I know you love the big guys. I love the big guys too, honestly. I do love the big guys. I do love the big guys too, and there's a time and place. But efficiently, it's more efficient to have a wide receiver 3 who's competent in quality than it is to put a fullback in a second and mid situation. But we would rather have a fullback in than a wide receiver 3 in, unfortunately. And again, I get it if you're running,
teams,
but like,
I'd agree with you.
And Ham's effective. Ham's a good quality fullback, and that's why he was higher on that ranking than BB, because BB's not a good quality wide receiver 3.
I think we just need to accept the team that we are, though, and like having CJ Ham out there over a BB is kind of how this offense is just going to be. We see the Kansas City Chiefs, we see the Buffalo Bills, and I know as Viking fans we would love to see our team do that, but that's just not how we're built. And I think once we accept that, which I feel like a good portion of the fans have, then we can just stop being upset at at Chad Beebe.
Maximize your strengths, minimize your weaknesses, and if Kubiak does that and he keeps Zimmer happy, Kubiak will have free reign to get creative, and I have a feeling he will do just that this season.
So I have a quick question, because Dave, you just said maximize strengths and minimize weaknesses. So you think it's more of a strength to have a 12 or whatever personnel on the field than a wide receiver 3, like an 11 personnel?
The difference is,
like, why? Because is it because we have a quarterback that maybe is not a strength?
No, our quarterback
is Baker Mayfield better than Kirk Cousins?
No.
Oh, I'm going to shut this down if this is where it's going.
Kirk Cousins is a better quarterback. Kirk Cousins is a good quarterback. Kirk Cousins has his foibles, but he is a good quarterback.
Why would 11 personnel not be a strength then?
All right.
If he is a good
you're looking at statistics, pure statistics, yes, passes get you more yards per play than anything else, right? So, thusly, a third wide receiver gives you that third chance to get more yards per play. However, if that third wide receiver is not good enough, then he is a detraction on that. If that 12 lineup gets you shorter passes or passes to the tight ends, or better running with a running back that gets you an average of 5 or 6 yards per play, that outscores and is more efficient than that occasional 50% catch by Chad Beebe. I will take that. It is more consistent. It drives down the field. It keeps you in better field position. And that
possession,
I will take. That's
all that stuff. Yeah.
I think it's more efficient for this team, how this team is built, just like Matt said.
But if Kirk is the guy, that shouldn't be the case, though. That's, I guess, my point.
I don't see Kirk throwing ungodly amounts of yards to a wide open passing type system. I don't see him fitting into that. He's better.
I agree with you. I agree with you, Dave. That's the issue, though. Is all I'm trying to say.
Right.
I'm going to come to Kirk's defense here a little bit and just say we can blame him for his flaws, but he can only do as much as the offense is going to let him do. And I think that's
right. And
one
you're
of those
right.
things
and
that we have to accept.
I agree. I think we should probably what was the terminology last year with Russell Wilson? Let Russ cook.
Yeah.
I think we should let Kirk cook and see what we got. And obviously we saw those really shitty stakes he made last year. But from a football sense, let him cook and see what he's got. And and see if if we have the quarterback of the quarterback for the
We've
long
seen
term
him cook
here.
before. We saw it against the Rams on that Thursday night game.
Yep.
And he was wheeling and dealing. I mean, we've seen it in spurts, so I know it's
Right.
in there. It's just a matter
He's a
of
very high, low, cyclical type quarterback.
The best explanation I have for Kirk Cousins, and this is maybe a little bit off topic here, right, is he is a perfectly fine quarterback, and he's a very good quarterback a lot of the time. And every so often, a game might have a handful of plays where his brain just shuts off and it stops working. And his brain stops,
things go off
his brain
script.
just literally stops working. And there's no explanation for some of his mistakes because they are not consistent with who he is as a player usually, right?
Yep.
Like the mistakes he makes aren't who Kirk is as a player if you were to describe him, right? Because he's a very smart player, and then it just so happens that every so often his brain shuts off, and that's the frustrating part.
I call it vapor locking.
Yeah,
when the old carburetors and you get air in your gas, and that's what happens when things go off script for Kirk Cousins.
Yep.
And the funny thing is I think a lot of people think that I'm like a Kirk hater, and I'm really not. I think I do think he's a top 10 quarterback, which
he's right
by most standards is a pretty good quarterback. But the issue is that that's not good enough in this NFL, unfortunately. And hopefully it is. Like, hopefully we can surround him with a team that allows that to be good enough, right? And hopefully we did that. I mean, I think we add a lot of great defensive pieces. I think we have some really good offensive pieces. I still think there's two glaring needs on this team, which we discussed today, defensive end and wide receiver 3. And if we can address those, I think we're going to have a really strong chance at making a really quality season. Because I think he is good enough to get us there with those extra components.
Before we take it home here, I'll give you a hot take. I think, given the Kellen Mond acquisition, I think you see Kirk in his best form ever this fall. And he will be in the MVP running by the end of the year. That is my hot take for this season. It's June, so maybe he'll get hurt and I won't have to see that to fruition. But
yeah, that's pretty hot right there. I mean, I could see Kirk in the conversation for MVP at some point in the season. If we wanted to use the phrasing at some point in the season, where if we start off hot, like he starts off in the conversation for MVP. I don't think he's going to be able. Well, okay, so let me kind of hedge this a little bit because the problem is there are quarterbacks who are just so insanely good who offer things that Kirk Cousins cannot physically offer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about Patrick Mahomes, right? That it's going to be hard for him to sustain an MVP level campaign, especially because the Vikings want to run the football, right? So you need to throw for 40 touchdowns and 4,500 yards and have an incredibly good team, or be the other end of the spectrum like Lamar Jackson, where you throw for 35 touchdowns and rush for 10 touchdowns and 1,000 yards, right? If you're not putting up the volume in terms of passing yards or whatever. But Kirk is gonna get probably not even 4,000 passing yards. He might hit 30 touchdowns if the Vikings are very efficient on the season. That's just not good enough for MVP. So that might be the crux of the issue for MVP there.
And I just think that we're gonna see just a very, very aggressive team this year. There are no assurances for Zimmer, so there's no reason for him to hold anything back. And I think the same could be said for Kirk Cousins. I don't see Kirk Cousins signing another contract here, just from a financial reason, not a talent-wise perspective. And I think he also is one of those guys that's just no, I need to go out there, put together a great season. But a lot of that can be dictated off of just how the offensive run is run, like you said. We are heading in here on an hour, so I want to take us home with each of you touching on one training camp battle that you're looking forward to this summer. And Dave, I want to put you on the spot first.
I've already said it. It's Wanham and Weatherly. I want to see who owns that edge spot.
Ryan?
It's not necessarily a training camp battle per se, because I think a lot of this stuff is pretty set in stone. I want to see how Kellen Mond performs in the preseason and training camp. I just want to see what I was looking at him prior to the draft. I know we did a lot of draft coverage. And can you guys hear me? Sorry, my screen. I'm not quite.
Your internet's going to.
Yeah, actually, I'm sure it is. My bad. So I want to see what we have. And I think that he is a player that some people are really high on, some people are really low on. I was one of the high ones, so I want to see where he's at and see if there's potential in him to take over in 2022.
So Ryan's is the QB2 battle. So Matt, how about you?
Yeah, so I'm actually probably most interested, and this is something we've not talked about at all, really, is the returner battles. Just because it was so abysmal last year, and now we've got a ton of options, I think. We have KJ Osborne, who I think is bad. Who apparently impressed in minicamp as a receiver, which is interesting because he was not a good receiver at all in college.
Maybe he steps up to be wide receiver 3.
Maybe he does.
No,
but hey, man, if he's good, I'd rather have him over Chad Beebe. But
that's fair.
I don't want KJ Osborne returning. I don't think that's going to end well. Kenny Wangu, right, 4th round pick. Obviously, a lot of return chops. He would be probably my leader in the clubhouse right now. He'd be who I expect to win it. Smith Marset has a lot of return chops as well. And you still have Amir Abdul on the roster, who I think is a very good returner, and I think will make the roster. The Vikings keep 4 running backs. They have for like 3 years now. And he's somebody who I kind of like as a returner. He was pretty effective. So it's interesting that they've never locked him in as their real kick returner, but I think it'll be a really interesting battle to see who comes out of that. And the kicking competition as well is kind of like special teams in general is very interesting for the Vikings. I don't love either of the kickers, but hey, like
they'll give us like heartburn.
Yeah,
something like that.
Vikings and kickers, man, it's never gonna go good.
Death, taxes, and Vikings kickers. All things are, for sure. Well, I want to thank you all for coming on tonight. I know it's been a long time coming, and everybody in the chat and who's listening, I appreciate you coming back, even though we've been off for a little bit. Not sure when the next show will be, but I can promise you that from myself and everybody at Climb in the Pocket, once training camp and preseason get here, you can look to us for a bunch of content throughout the rest of the season. And hey, there's games this year that we can go to. So if you're in Minnesota, hit me up on Twitter. I'd love to meet some of you guys out there. And I think I'm actually going to the LA game. So if people are out there too, I will. I'll reach you guys out there. So
we might need
thank
to
you.
talk about the LA game. We might need to talk
yes,
about it.
Let's do it. Matt, Ryan, Dave, thank you very much, and have a good night, everybody.
See ya. Thank you for watching or listening. As always, if you like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. And if you're listening to the podcast, please rate us on your favorite aggregator. Skol, everybody.